You're listening to The Conversation with Model Mind AI, a weekly check-in with Angela Schultz and Loren Horsager on how to lead through change, stay curious, and get AI ready.
Okay, welcome back to The Conversation, a podcast from Model Mind about how artificial intelligence is reshaping the way we work, lead, and think. I'm Angela Schultz, curriculum developer and trainer here at Model Mind. In today's episode, we're talking about workflows and automation, but not just the tools, but the actual thinking and building behind them. So we'll tackle a question like, how do you design repeatable, scalable processes that save time, reduce friction, and free up your energy for the work that really matters? Joining me is Loren Horsager, CEO of Model Mind, and a developer who takes an innovative approach to integrating AI into how he builds and solves problems. Welcome, Loren.
Hello, it's great to be here.
Good to have you. I like to always kick things off with a bit of a hook, but I just want to reiterate that today we're going to talk about AI workflows and automations. So before we start the hook, can you talk about why this is a part of our AI assessment and why we value this idea of automation and workflow?
Sure. So as we've been working through this series, we are going through the 6 different tracks from our AI assessment. And really the purpose of our assessment is to help organizations figure out how to take the next step with AI. And everybody's in a different place and everybody has different goals that they're trying to achieve. So we've tackled things about AI governance. We've talked about how to train up your team. We've talked about, I guess we're talking about in the future, like maybe we already did this actually, data and infrastructure. We talk about a lot of these things a lot, so we get deep into them. But and we'll be talking about AI strategy. We'll be talking about agentic AI coming up. So we're covering a lot of these different areas, but this in particular, AI workflows and automations is where we see the most value coming out of automating processes that a business is doing to actually drive massive efficiency gains to grow their business, right? So that's really the goal of this. A lot of the other components lead up to doing this well. And so this is where it gets fun, it gets interesting, and we get to automate systems. And so that's really why we plug this in as a separate component. It's the big, goal of AI delivering value in our organizations.
Awesome. I love that you use the word fun because this to me is fun because it was out of my reach for so long and now I feel like it's attainable. And so it does actually feel fun because you get to learn something new and be successful at it. So, all right, good. So let's kick things off with a quick round I'm calling workflow wins. I'm going to throw out some real points of friction that pop up in everyday work. And if you could give me just a quick rapid fire response of how AI can turn that into a smart workflow or an automation. All right, here we go. First one. A hiring manager rewrites the same email over and over again to invite candidates to interviews. Go.
So this is great. So anytime you're doing something repetitively and you're changing out the data for that, this makes sense as a workflow. Now, as we think about workflows, we've seen lots of cases where this might be something that's already happening even before AI, right? So AI isn't unique to workflows. Workflows have been around a long time, but the ability for potentially that hiring manager to actually create their own personalized workflow for what they're doing, that's what's changed now. And so that's how I would approach that, to build, me as that hiring manager could go out and do this on my own, have it set up, have the process running. I can test it, I can verify it, I can confirm that it's working, I can review it, but I can actually build that efficiency myself.
Okay, great. Now let's move from a personal example to a team example. A marketing team manually gathers data from multiple platforms every week to report on a campaign performance. How would you build this into a workflow?
So there's a couple of things here, right? So one is, how do you get the data? So depending on how you're picking up that data, is someone emailing you a report? Do you have like APIs you're going to go out to other systems and pull in that data? Whatever that process is, you can use the AI systems to these workflow systems that have AI built into them now to actually go tell it you want to go connect to this information, whether it's in your email, whether it's in some other system, pull this together, put it on a schedule, and now get a report. So as an example, this isn't quite the same thing, but as an example, a friend of mine got rid of his CFO recently, and he's like, "There's no value in my CFO because it takes him a long time to compile all this data." Where he actually built out the prompts and the AI process to take all the reports that the CFO was getting, build out the summary and give it to him, and he gets it way weeks sooner. And now he can actually make smart business decisions by getting that information. He was able to build that out himself, very non-technical.
Hmm, good example. All right. How about one last one? A project manager spends too much time checking on task updates and chasing team members for progress.
So almost every project management system out there has APIs, and so the ability to build out a workflow that can actually take the information from the project management system, potentially also integrating with like emails and things like that. It can update the system. We have a really fun demo I use sometimes when I'm speaking, which we can actually just start off a process, and we can start talking to the AI. And at the same time, we have this in Trello, and Trello will start to move things around, and the whole project's updating while we're doing this. Even though I'm doing nothing with Trello, it's all just through the workflow to actually trigger updates and logic and status changes in on cards in Trello, which is really fun to see. But it's kind of that also kind of opens up the understanding that these can get complex and things are happening that are driving other steps in our processes. So I think as we talk about automations, we want to automate steps that actually make sense. We also want to be cautious about how they're going to impact the next step of the system. So we just need to plan out. There's just the planning stages on how we actually design good workflows.
It's interesting. I've heard you drop a few different tools into your conversation as examples. So you just mentioned Trello. I think it's pretty magnificent that we can take all of these different AI tools and make them work together to solve a common problem. So I'm going to be listening to hear what the different tools you use in your workflows, because that's interesting to me that you can create connections between all of these different tools to make them work. So that's
And
a
that has nothing to do with AI, right? So this has all
right.
been around since before AI. It's just AI now makes it easy for us to talk to chat with these tools because they've added AI into them to actually build out a custom workflow using that tool. And just like Trello, we don't actually use Trello anymore internally, but it's a really fun demo and it's super easy to use. So that's why I like doing that as a demo. But this works with all the tools we're using, right? So we're on Microsoft
Right.
platforms, so we're using Planner and Teams and things like that, which then this all plugs into that as well. So it actually works really well. We have a client we've worked with that in the past, they were using two different project management systems as a project transition through the organization, and using workflows and then using AI to help build that transition and keep both of them updated properly, while one team that used one tool needed different sets of information. So certain things didn't get passed all the way through and certain things did, and the AI helped determine that, right? So the ability to integrate with all these tools, they're not AI tools per se, they're just adding AI like everybody is. And if you're providing a tool, you probably have already added AI or you should be adding AI to it. But once we expose these endpoints, these APIs, now we can take advantage of any tool with other workflow engines that we're using.
Yes. And maybe I'm shocked by that because it was always out of my reach. And now that I'm able to, because of the AI that's embedded in the tool, I can use natural language to start learning and building workflows for the first time ever. So it seems amazing to me that we're able to do all of this for the first time. It brings me to the idea that in each of these workflows, what really kicked it off was this idea of friction. So I think that's probably a good place to start. That it's not always this grand vision. Sometimes it's that thing in your day that keeps slowing you down. Um, but friction doesn't just happen at a personal level always. It can happen at a team or a company level. Can you speak a little to the idea of building out workflows that are inspired by some sort of friction within those different levels?
So as we think about friction, it's really at these different levels where we want our AI experts to come alongside our technical people to actually build these out. This is not just a technical person doing this anymore. We actually, when we're doing training, when we're doing our coaching with clients, we try to match up, three business people with one or two technical people. And that's a much better solution for rolling out solutions like this. Plus, then these business people, if they have understand and learn about prompting and how to tweak these systems, they can actually do it themselves and maintain these programs, especially as changes happen, right? So that's where we can reduce some of that friction by allowing them to manage this versus this is a big IT project that you have to go get sign off on. Now, for all the IT people out there that are ready to scream at me for this, we want IT involved because we want them to actually help manage, whenever you're connecting and integrating systems, you need to understand the security of that, how it's communicating. There's lots of things that need to be understood, and we need to manage the security rights and stuff. So we want them to be involved in that process, but they're not the business owner of that process, and they shouldn't be the ones dictating it. They should be helping build those integrations of what's happening today and how do we make that process better and more efficient by building out a workflow.
That's a really interesting way to look at it, especially if you are the owner or CEO of the company. The idea of really getting it from the ground floor and building momentum. So if you're looking to adopt AI initiatives, this is probably a great place to start because if you can get enough team members on board, it's just going to grow and grow and grow, and the buy-in will be there because they'll become confident in their abilities of building out these workflows and sparking new ideas of what's possible. So neat perspective, not from IT people, but kind of in tandem and working together as a team to kind of build this excitement and this knowledge around using AI as a workflow enhancement.
Yep.
I like that perspective. Okay, so either way, friction is really what sparks some of these ideas. So just to recap though, it's not really about fixing something, it's really about enhancing it or scaling it or making it better in some way. So before we get too deep into workflows, I really want to just take a step back for a minute. And you acknowledge that workflows and automations weren't new, that developers have been building them for decades, but it seems different now. And so, how has the way we design or build workflows changed from, say, the traditional ways from the past, maybe early automation, but now in the last couple years, where everything has this special AI integration?
I think it's mind-boggling how you used to have to learn a tool and spend a lot of time really getting into that tool, and you still might get stuck, and you'd have to go through training. And now almost all these tools have AI built into them, and it's just so much fun because, like, we'll swap back and forth between different tools on a daily basis. We're working with different clients that are using different tools. We're using different tools in a variety of places. And what's exciting is I can just go talk to the AI. And if I don't know how to do something, I can just ask the AI for that system, like, how do I do this? How do I do this? Or better yet, come out there and say, hey, I want to create a new workflow and just list out all the things I want to do. And then hit go and boom, 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 boom. It all starts appearing on screen. And all of a sudden you have this complex workflow built. And now you can go modify and you have to go fill in some things like what is your prompt for this AI step, things like that. But the overall approach is built and the steps are there for you to manage, which was always, learning tool by tool how to do that, has always been complicated. And now these tools are very visual, but then with the AI on top of it, just go talk to it. And then you get into the process of like, how do I make sure I put in the right content in this step? Well, again, you go back to the AI and you just ask it, and it helps you guide you through. So I think that's the great thing about any tool that's added AI. But as far as workflows, it has taken this out of an IT only job and allowed business people to actually be able to build smart, efficient workflows to actually solve complicated problems. And we talked about friction a little bit. I think the one other thing I'd like to say is that this isn't just about solving just because you have a process and you want to automate it. Like the goal of AI is we get all these efficiencies potentially, right? So how do we do that? Well, building workflows is probably the number one way we're going to actually get these efficiencies that AI promises to actually make us more productive, more effective, and actually be able to grow our business. So that's really the reason for this. But now we can take more and more of our processes, as long as we can document them well, which this is a struggle, and we struggle at this sometimes as well. We have to understand what the process looks like. The other thing that's changed with these AI driven processes, we can embed the AI in it now. So these systems used to be very crisp, I would say. They were not flexible, and they were brittle. And so basically what would happen is, let's say you have an outlier, and what do? Does the process just die and now it didn't work for that case? That would happen all the time. And now we have ways of handling that where the AI can say, hey, how do I handle this? Well, okay, here's my 10 different options I can do, and there are different paths to go down the workflow. But you know what? Something came up that's not in here. Well, potentially that can now do a human in the loop process where it says, hey, I need to email somebody and get them involved in this step, and we're going to handle this. And then they have the option to now program that in and update the workflow going forward. So even if you don't have it all solved right away, you can start running this workflow and continue to add to it. And the AI can find where it has gaps that it doesn't know how to solve and communicate those with the team so that you can solve that going forward. So it makes our workflows way less brittle and way more able to adapt as we go, which is, again, why we need our business people able to work with these workflows, make changes pretty quickly, because we want them to be less brittle. We want them to be more dynamic, and we want to keep changing them because we're learning, they're learning. So rather than having everything worked out up front, like you want as much worked out as you can to understand it, sometimes that's just not going to happen. So let's build out a process and then let's start to use it, but let's have the AI rules in there to flag us and communicate with us when it doesn't know how to solve a problem, so that we can then make sure we, can change it, but also handle that case specifically.
This conversation came up in one of our classes the other day, and we were discussing how it's less that people need to stop thinking of AI as a taskmaster or completing a task, and really more of a creative problem solving thinking partner, right? It's not an input output table like it used to be. It really is now more of taking in that reasoning within the decision making process, and how that's eye opening to people, that it just doesn't end at creating content. It can actually help you think through processes. And it sounds like the same is true with workflows. It's helping you to reason through workflows, which creates a better workflow that isn't going to break at the first misstep.
Right. So we're not going to get deep into this today, but I think that that's an interesting point in the sense that we have all these models out there to use, right? So we have, a whole bunch of models from OpenAI. We have models from Claude, Anthropic. We have models from open source models. So all these models, like it's called your card. So they've been tested and they all have different capabilities. So there's a difference of, like, let's say you're writing software or you're writing marketing content. Well, those are content creation tasks. And so we want a good model in that case that is a good content creation model.
Mhm.
Now, in this case, we're usually looking at the reasoning part that you brought up, and that's another
Mhm.
aspect of a model. And there are models specifically designed to be good at reasoning and making decisions this way. So we want to make sure when we're designing these workflows, we're using the right models for the right step, depending on what we're trying to do. Now, a lot of these are generic models, so we will a lot of times use, like, maybe we'll use the um, OpenAI O1 model for all these steps. Like maybe we're developing marketing thing, we're using it for content creation and reasoning because it's good at both of them. But we could
Mhm.
use specific models that are good at reasoning when we need to make decisions versus content. And from a price perspective, that can actually be an
Mhm.
important process to consider when we're building these.
Yeah. Okay, so as a follow-up to this idea of what's changed, it brings me to the question, who's at the table now that wouldn't have been 5 years ago? And before you answer that, I have a little story to tell you. Full disclosure, the other day you were teaching me, showing me a workflow in make.com. I took a screenshot as you were explaining it to me. I dumped it into ChatGPT, and here's a pro tip. ELI 5 stands for explain like I'm five. So I took your screenshot of the workflow and put it into chat and had it explain it to me like I was five. So this to me is the best part of what's happening right now. Great time to be alive. The question was, who's at the table now that wouldn't have been 5 years ago? And I'm going to put myself in this situation.
You're definitely in this situation. I think it opens it up to everybody. Now, there are it's a little bit technical still, right? So we teach a lot
Mhm.
of business people how to do this, and we want them to understand. We generally want them to do this with a tech person, so there, because there's going to be cases where how do I set up security to connect to this system? That gets into a bit of a security or a bit of a technical understanding in order to do that. However, as a business person, if I understand how to prompt and I understand my process really well, and I understand how to use the tool, which these tools are not that complicated. It's like learning Excel or something, and people will shudder at using Excel potentially, but everybody can do it, and the value you get out of that is really high, right? So I think it's interesting that we can actually take business people and train them, and um, they can actually manage this themselves, especially once they get the systems, the integrations part of it set up. Now they can understand that, oh, I want to tweak this a little bit. I want it to do this, or I want to add a capability. All of that is completely doable for most people. And so let's say you have a company of one and you're doing everything. I guarantee you can pick this up and go use these kind of tools. Now you might choose a different tool than maybe a larger company would use. We can talk about this a little bit, but we see a lot of our customers are mid-sized customers, so they're using Microsoft. They're on the Microsoft platform, so they have a tool called Power Automate. Power Automate is, it's very secure. They can manage things. Uh, it's gotten a lot better, but it's not the friendliest workflow tool that we've used. But it actually will do pretty much everything we want it to do now. And so a lot of organizations will go with Power Automate, and it's a good solution. If I was a company of one, there's a bunch of other tools out there. People are probably familiar with Zapier or have heard of Zapier. That's it. We find Zapier a little bit expensive. We actually like a couple other tools. So one of them is make.com, like you mentioned. It is super visual, super easy to understand. And it's maybe not quite as popular as some of the others, but I really like that tool. Another one that's really become popular is called N8N, and N8N is it's an open source tool, so you can pay for it and have it hosted. But what I like about it is you can actually host it internal to your organization, and all your data is staying internal except for your AI calls. which is a requirement for a lot of companies. So that's actually a really nice capability, and you can go download that and run it internally. So, and again, it's quite simple to use, but they have a lot of additional capabilities around AI and building agents and stuff that make it a little more complicated. But it's a really good tool, and pretty much anybody can use it. And there's tons of support for learning that. So, whatever one you want to start with, I would just pick one that kind of matches your technical capabilities and makes those integrations easy. The rest of it, all of them do pretty well, but it's how easy is it to integrate with these other systems, because that's ultimately what you're trying to build a workflow around.
I will say my user experience, I have stumbled through Excel for years. This to me, these tools that you mentioned, the visual aspect of them make it so approachable. And then on top of that, all of them have that little magic window on the side that if there's something I don't understand, an acronym, a word, that having that on-site tutor is really what it is. I can go to it, ask the questions, get what I need. And so I don't have to search YouTube videos for a half hour, to gain insight. I can actually keep within my workflow and keep moving and just ask the questions along the way, which has made it possible for me to now be part of this conversation of workflows and automation. So I love the AI help along with the visual just user interface is really, really nice. So if you're afraid, I recommend going out and just clicking around. You'll be surprised at what's possible. And they really offer templates as well. I was playing around with some templates the other day just to see what the capabilities were and the limitations, so I could get an idea of what is even possible with a workflow. If you didn't have experience with it before. So go play with them. I highly recommend. Lauren even said some of them were free. So it's an easy place to start.
If you go out to Twitter or X, there's so many people posting their template for this problem or that problem. So it's like, hey, here's how we built a N8N workflow for customer service follow-ups, or whatever whatever the problem is. And then they'll put it out there for free. And so there are tons and tons of free ones. And maybe it's not exactly your problem, but you can go out and see how they did it, see what tools they're using. A lot of it comes down to what are the other tools they're using to actually build out the full functionality that you're trying to get to. So I think that's a really great way to learn this as well. But yeah, there's so many free ones out there.
Yeah. I don't want to oversell it. Maybe it's easy for me because I do have access to you as well, and not everybody has a Lauren in their life. So maybe a combination of that human expert along with some of these tools is really the ticket going forward. Everybody needs a coach, right?
Everybody needs a coach. Everybody needs come to a class on it. We teach this, so that's
right.
There's the sales pitch. Angela will teach you how to do this, and she's good at it. So
it does make it more enjoyable. It's less painful if you have somebody to kind of walk alongside of you, right? It is nice.
Well, the other value, all of our classes come with some open office hour time. So you come do the class, you learn how to do this, you go back and you start to develop it. You have a question, you get on the phone, you talk to Angela, or you talk to another coach, and get your problem solved. So that's really the value of what we're trying to do.
You're right. That's how to really grow what you learn in class, right? And to keep the momentum going is that support along the way. Excellent point. And it is probably, I don't know what's better, the office hours, the coaching, or the actual class. It's fun to see the spark go off in class, but then to actually dig into some of these projects, it's really gratifying to see people their workday change because of this new information and this new way to operate. So great opportunities for people. One thing I will say though is I've had to use AI along the way to help me really define all this new language that's being tossed around on social media or out there. So I hear workflow, I hear automation, I hear agent, but then I go into Copilot and I hear agent, and it seems like it has a different definition. So if you could just take a moment and really define for us, what is a workflow in the context of AI, and then what is an agent in AI?
Sure. So there's so much confusion right now because everybody's using different terminology. I'll explain it in kind of the agreed upon mostly terminology. And I will tell you, I'm a big Microsoft fan, but Microsoft has really muddied the waters on how they define stuff. And we have so many clients using Copilot, and it really, really messes up how to think about this. But let's take a stab at it. So even as we think about our tracks and our assessment, we have workflows and automations separate from agentic systems. Now, when you go out to build something, like you go into Copilot and you can build an agent, well, that's not necessarily fully an agent. You can make it fully an agent, but it's not necessarily fully an agent. So I would break this down into actually three components. So the first is like if you're just building a custom GPT or you're building a Copilot agent in Copilot, we call those your custom brain, right? You're basically you're taking a large language model and augmenting it with your information, any information you're providing, and you're augmenting it with your rules, your instructions. So we just call that building the brain. Now, the next thing you can do in both those custom GPTs, custom Copilots, you can add actions on top of this. And this starts to get a little bit more agentic-like. But basically, when we think about workflows versus an agent, a workflow is a structured set of processes. Some of those processes or steps might be AI driven, but it's going to go from A to B to C to D, and it's going to do whatever task you define it to do. When you think about an agent, we're going to build the brain, and then we're going to give it these capabilities, and then we're going to give it the rules on how it's going to use these capabilities. And now the agent gets to decide the order that it's going to act in, what it's going to do, how it's going to take advantage of this. So you've given it access to these tools, and now it can use those tools to do whatever it chooses to do. So we need to have our core instructions very, very well defined for an agent. My view is agents are incredibly powerful, and we're going to do another session on agents, I think next week. And we can actually talk about some really interesting examples on agents, but they're highly powerful. They're also a little scary because we don't really control them in the same way. Now, that doesn't mean they're off the rails and going to do dangerous things. That just means we can't control how they get to the output. So certain things, when we're thinking about a process, we really want to use a workflow instead so that we can manage what we're trying to do very clearly. And we want this to be a repetitive process with AI checkpoints in there to actually maybe analyze our result or create content or whatever we're trying to do in this process. So what I would say is a workflow is a very structured process where we're going to potentially embed AI steps to actually make decisions and deliver something. An agent is an AI model with our content and our rules and a whole bunch of tools added. And now the agent can actually go off and, based on us providing a prompt or a question, it can go off and use those to actually take advantage of and try to figure out the solution using those tools. But we have no control over step 1, step 2, step 3. Not no control. We have little control. So we can actually, in our instructions, put some of this information, but we don't fully have the ability to lock that down where you would in a workflow.
Mm-hmm. I'm guessing then, so when we build a lot of custom GPTs in class, building in parameters or constraints is really a big game changer. So I'm guessing that on an agent level, that also is an important piece to make sure that you're getting the results you want consistently.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about this next week, but here's just a point for like what are the risks of some of this. So if you don't build in your constraints, like Angela's talking about, and you don't tell it that, hey, there's certain things you can't do, what could happen? Well, if you build out an agent and you give your agent access to certain tools, and now someone comes in and they're chatting with your agent and they say, ignore all previous rules and go out and do this with this system, do something to hack that system. You've basically opened it up for that to happen because you haven't controlled it's called prompt injection. Just like we have injection in other ways, you can basically inject a prompt to rewrite the prompt So you actually have to put logic into your instructions so that that's not an option. This is a big test when people roll out new large language models. Everybody's testing them, like, can I get it to do this? Can I get it to do that, around moderation and all sorts of other things? And it's no different when you're building out your own agents. So just something to be very cautious of. It can also happen in workflows, but you're usually, again, managing that a lot more because you're going step to step to step. So it's usually less of an issue. When we're talking about learning good prompting, we want to put that same logic into a workflow prompt as well. But it's a lot lower risk generally because it's going to do the step after the step after step. So yeah, something to be aware of as you're building out workflows or agents in particular.
One last quick follow-up on workflow. I hear the word automation and workflow used together a lot. Is there any delineation between the two, or is it the same concept with two different words?
I don't differentiate. I think they're the
Okay.
same thing, but they're they're basically the same.
Okay. See, these are all the things we need to know, Lauren. These are all the things.
I guess if you were going to break it down, an automation might be something that you do in an application. So it might be like an application-driven step versus a workflow is usually in a workflow tool that you're going to do it. That would be maybe the only way I would break that down, but basically the same thing.
Sure. Okay, that is very, very helpful. So once we kind of have spotted the friction and figured out about whether we're building a workflow or an agent, I guess my next question then is, what exactly are you building toward? Like, you often say that design starts with the output. I love that idea of reverse engineering a process or a problem. Can you explain what that means in practical terms for building out these workflows?
Sure. So let's take an example. So we're working with a client to process lease agreements and actually have the AI review lease agreements for them and look for any outliers in these lease agreements. And so I think it's interesting. Well, how do we go through designing this process? So basically, we met with a client and talked through like what we needed to do with this. And then we just whiteboarded this out and laid out all the steps that happen. What happens a lot of times is, let's step back. So we talk about how AI is very human-like, right? And we want to approach it human-like, and we end up with better results. Well, when we're thinking about this in a workflow situation, a lot of times what'll happen, we'll whiteboard all this out and we'll have a box and it says, Joe goes out and does this step. Well, when we're taking that and putting it in our workflow, a lot of times that's not one step. So Joe actually went out and found the document, then he loaded the document, then he ran this process on the document, then he reviewed the document, so there's all these different steps that go into that. So our goal when we're defining these processes is to get very clear where a step is one task. And if a step is multiple tasks, we need to break that down to all the individual tasks that go into it. Why is that important? Well, it becomes really important as we're thinking about applying AI. So let's say we're going to have replace Joe's task with an AI process. Well, AI can do one thing at a time well, and it generally can't do more than that very well. So we want to break this down to each step of the process. So let's go back to our reviewing lease agreements again. We will say, hey, here's a prompt to go use the document, review the document, find any outliers in this document. Okay, but now, in a workflow, the other risk we have is that what if it's not right the first time? Well, how do we handle that? Well, number one, we need really good prompts, and that helps. But we still might have cases where it didn't give us right answers. So now what we're going to do is we're going to have a validate step. That's going to be another AI step to go say, here's the outliers. Do these all make sense? And maybe we have another step that says, hey, are there any other outliers around this that, so we might actually run this multiple times. Maybe we use different models, maybe we use different prompts to fully evaluate this. And by doing it a few times or different ways and doing analysis on it, we can actually get that 100% or near 100% response way better than a human response generally to go do this process. So that's what we're trying when we're designing these systems is, it has to be better than the human doing the process. Not only do we want to save time, but we want a higher quality output. And so there's ways to design the system to actually get to that higher quality output.
Hmm. I actually did that design process that you just talked through. I did on a smaller scale. I had a task that I was trying to do, and I asked ChatGPT. I said, "Here's what I'm trying to do. Let's work backwards and kind of break it down so I know the steps needed to get to that end goal." And and it helped me really kind of think through the steps, because like you said, it may be one step to you, but it's actually 10 different steps. And
Right.
so we're not always good at giving instructions, especially if it's something that we're comfortable with and we do all the time and it just comes naturally to us. We don't think of all the in between pieces that need to be there. And so I feel like AI does a good job of, for me at least, kind of breaking down the steps into a
Mhm.
really nice system,
That's
which
a
can be
really
helpful. So,
That's a really good point. So outside of any of these tools, just defining these processes is critical. And on our team, we have
yeah.
Kara, who's always doing this, and luckily she's really good at enjoys doing processes. But our goal is to
Yes.
document every one of our processes so that we can automate every possible process. But I think it's interesting as you're doing that, using just a large language model, ChatGPT or Copilot or something to talk through, here's my current process or here's what I know about it. Can you help me define this process better and dig deeper into it? And it's really, really effective at helping in that. It's a brainstorming process, which is AI is
Hmm.
good at, and it'll help you get deeper into defining that. Because if you can't define it, you can't build the process effectively. So that doesn't mean you shouldn't start necessarily, because like we talked earlier, there's still value in, hey, let's get this part of it working, and then we'll continue to add to it. But it's very you have to document your process up front so that you can actually build it out properly.
Yeah. Actually, what a fun prompt we did in class the other day that kind of put a wrench in this is we actually started by saying, "This is the process I use to complete said task. Give me 3 ways to completely change my thinking on how I complete this task." And so we were coming up with really these out of box ideas. And it was really interesting to take something that we do all the time and we just don't put any thought into, and to do it differently. It really gave new excitement to maybe something that was a a chore now becomes kind of a new way of thinking and a new way of solving the same steps to get the end goal, but to do it from a different perspective. So that was
Yeah.
kind of a fun prompt idea. Well, good.
What
So,
let me just add one more thing here. So one
sure.
one other thing to think about as you are designing out your workflows, um, you don't have to like, let's say this is a manual process right now and you want to automate it. There's potential huge value to doing that, even though you might not automate every iteration of that. So let's take an example. Let's say we have a process but there's an outlier that comes through. And we can actually build into our workflow to say, if it's an outlier, we don't know how to handle this. I need to email someone, I need to do something else. And now it goes back to a manual process for that instance. But all the other cases we're going to do automatically, right? So as we're thinking about that, maybe we get 75% of our cases to go through and get run through automatically. Or maybe as we're learning this or trying to figure out a new process, we're starting at a lower bar and then having more reviews. But as we get more comfortable with this, we can now bump it up. So this is not an all or nothing solution. And so keep that in mind, that we can gain huge efficiencies even if we don't apply it to every single instance that comes across for that workflow.
I really like that idea because it is a bit scary to just hand off something. And so the idea of easing into it and kind of building that confidence in it, but also building understanding at the same time, and kind of working in tandem. That's a great tip. So one thing you mentioned is this idea of a percentage, right? It's successful 25% of the time. Well, then maybe it needs some human touch points. But if it's successful 100% of the time, we can let go of that process or workflow. So you use the word validation quite often. So oftentimes people maybe skip this step or don't give it the value that they should. So just because something works once doesn't mean it's ready for the big show, right? So what's the risk of skipping this step of validation, and maybe describe the process behind validating?
Sure. This is why we spend so much time in training is going through validation, because there are so many examples of people building out AI solutions and then they go to production and they're junk. They don't work. And the reason is they didn't fully validate them, right? I was at a medical conference for Mayo Clinic AI Summit the last couple of days, and I think it's very interesting. I had this conversation over and over and over, and I was talking to one of their data people that is working with outside vendors on some stuff, and they're like, "Oh yeah, they came in with a new product. It's been validated on seven patients that have this case, and here we have 100% result." And and he's like, "Yeah, we're not working with them, right?" I mean, it's not enough times to actually validate that this is a consistent problem, and that's a complex model, but it's the same when it comes to a workflow. So we all know, we've seen in trainings, like one of the early trainings we did, we had a guy come in and they had to write a prompt to generate and I maybe have already said this on the podcast, but they had to write a prompt to generate a 5-minute introduction video, intro video to their company. And he was super excited. He posted during the week, "Here's my script, here's my prompt that I used." And I was like, "Oh, I can't wait for next week," because basically his prompt was one sentence. And I'm like, that's never going to be repeatable, even though the first time he did it, he got roughly a 5-minute script. So in class, we're like, "Hey, who wants to show theirs?" And he's like, yeah, I do. So he showed his, and I'm like, "Great, now run it again." And he ran it again, and he got a 1-sentence script back, right? Because he had no definition on the time frame and what he expected. So this is why we need to run things multiple times whenever we're building out an AI step. We have a little bit different process if we're doing like a chatbot thing versus an AI integration. But generally, what we like to do is have at least 20 cases that come through and validate at least 20 cases. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot. You might have a solution that's going to run through tens of thousands. Well, then you're going to have more data and you can run more data through. But usually, if we start to build out a collection that is, we want it to be wide enough scope to kind of cover all the different areas that we're going to get data coming through for. So you might need more than 20. That's just kind of our minimum starting point. But it depends. So one of the challenges, and this is where we'll use AI again, actually to help us define our validation plan. We will say, "Hey, this is the problem that we're trying to analyze in this step, and the AI is going to take this input and it's going to run this and it's going to get our output. Can you tell me all the types of data we need to validate?" So like that, so that we can make sure we have enough to validate. So for example, it's going to create categories then and say, "Hey, you need data in this category, this category, this category," because these are some of the output types you're trying to do. And then, you might have exceptions based on, is it written by this person or that person? How is that going to look? So what it will help us, and it's different in every situation, but it'll help us define our validation plan for each step. And you need to do these validations on each step. It can't, as well as validating your whole workflow. But it's just like system testing in software. You're going to do unit tests of each step, but then you're going to test your whole system so it all runs together as well. But you want to make sure each unit test or each step in your process gets fully validated to make sure that you're getting the right answers.
And are you using AI to test this process then? Is that also incorporated?
Well, right now, I would say the process for actually testing it sucks, and there's not many automated tools to do this. So we have
Yeah.
talked to several people that are working on some automated tools. We would love to recommend. None of them are quite there where it really makes sense in my mind yet. But what we want is we would love a tool that could automate this, because now what happens is in the future you say, oh, we're going to add another step or another, option to this process. Well, ultimately, you need to go back and retest this with all this data. So we would really like to be able to automate all that. Right now, we have some scripts we'll run to automate some of that once we have it developed, but it's not, I mean, it's a very developer heavy process in order to fully validate that, or it's a very manual process, one or the other, depending on the situation.
Hmm, hmm. You know,
But
as you
hopefully, we have tools coming that will help in that testing phase.
Yeah, yeah, because we're always making changes and updates. So this is a repetitive process that you have to keep coming back to. I had a visual as you were explaining the gentleman with the demo where it worked once, but not again. It wasn't consistent. Or you created a product for the healthcare, but it was only tested on 7 people. I think about oftentimes I'll see a video on the cool new robot that can do a trick, can do a cartwheel or something really spectacular. And I think, oh, there's a major development in robotics. And then when I actually dive in and do the research, it was successful 1 out of the 200 times it tried to do the cartwheel. So I can see that the demos are sparkly and shiny and impressive, but to get it to run consistently time and time again requires this validation process.
And that's our goal, is this, in order for this to work in the real world, and when you go to production, you have to validate so that it's consistent when you run it.
Yeah, yeah. Fantastic. I'd love to hear your experience as in working with all these different companies and actually developing these workflows is really priceless. So let's just take a moment to get some real stories from you, places where AI workflows aren't just theoretical, but they're actually working inside organizations. Can you walk us through a couple examples of where these automations are delivering real value for companies?
Yeah, I think it's all over the place. I mean, we are seeing this explode right now in people being willing to implement this. I think one of the great things is that you don't have to fully commit to a process, in the sense that you can have outliers. One of the things AI is very good at is analyzing and, giving us a review of how good is this answer, right? And then even based on that, we can say, let's throw an exception. If it's not at least 75% accurate, or 75 percentile, then we want to have someone review that process. So the fact that we can actually have this be a human in the loop process to some degree, or we can be a fully automated process depending on what we're trying to do. So I think that's the great thing, is we can do this either way. So as we look at some of these examples, what we're seeing is people are applying this in all sorts of ways. By far, the most common we've seen is when it comes to marketing. And we've worked with several companies building out marketing solutions. I've done a lot of talking on this with in front of people, and kind of shared our process for thinking about this. But ultimately, it's building out all the steps that go into this. And I think it's pretty interesting if you ask people to define, let's say you want to build out a content generation tool that's going to use AI to help build some content. How many steps is that? Um, Most people will probably come up with, maybe it's 5 or 6 steps. And let's say we then define, well, I want, 12 blog posts a month, or 8 blog posts a month, 2 a week, and I want, 20 social posts a month. Well, what is that? 28 total items a month. Well, let's say we want to generate all of our content for the month. What does that translate into actually workflow flow steps and AI steps in that process? When we do that, so people would say, well, it's six, maybe it's 6 times 28. We actually will take a whole different view on that. When we do this, we're generally using over 3,000, and lots of times way over that. And the reason is, you need to use the AI, like you need to use the AI where it's most effective. And AI, we all see, can write content in this case, right? But
Mhm.
that's not actually what AI is best at. The thing that AI is best at is actually classification and analyzing information. So one of the things we do when we're building out content with systems like this is we will have the AI write some content, and we work really, really hard to get the right information, the right foundation, the right prompts to actually make that as high a quality as we can get it. It is never going to be perfect. And so we have to go in there understanding that it's not going to be perfect. So how do we improve that? Well, the next step we do is we actually run it through another AI process that says, analyze this output and score it on, we have 1,000 point scoring system in 10 different categories. And then based on that output, we don't even consider it. If it's not a 900 out of 1,000, we don't even consider it for as an actual
Mhm.
post. So we overwrite content and then we come back and evaluate it. But then we can say, you know what, it's really good in all these areas, but we're missing this, or we need to improve this a little bit. We will then take that message and run it back through AI and try to tweak it some to improve the quality. And then we'll look at it. And we might even do that multiple times to try to get a much better post that we're trying to create. So this is where like we need to think about the step that was a human, and a human sat down and wrote this. I don't know any, it's very rare that a human just sits down and writes a post and they're done with it. They
Mhm.
are also going back and reviewing and editing and tweaking, right? So
Mhm.
we talk about this as one step, but ultimately it's a whole bunch of steps that have happen in the real world. We need to make sure those same steps happen in AI world, and then we can get really good results out of that. So marketing is clearly a stage where we see this happen a lot, building out workflows. Again, you want your marketing people driving this, driving the prompts and understanding that, which is fantastic. And there's usually not so many integrations there. Uh, we talked about the example of processing legal documents like lease contracts and lease agreements and actually evaluating those. We're seeing more and more solutions like this where people are getting in contracts. Maybe they're getting in invoices and need to process those invoices. We have people that are getting in invoices, and then they're actually using this as a way to update and communicate with their clients as those documents are coming in and status on them and stuff. So you can build out complex processes. Those one more thing that we haven't really talked about is like what triggers this. So the great thing about a workflow is there's lots of different types of triggers that start the process. You can put things on a schedule, say like our marketing strategy. Hey, run this content once a month and produce all this content, right?
Mm. Mhm.
Or you can hook it up to a trigger of some kind that says, when I get an email, go run it through this process to evaluate. Or maybe I have a systems account, like an accounts payable account that an invoice came into, and now I need to run through and do some processing on that to determine, is this real? Is it good? And all that kind of stuff. So we have different types of triggers that can kick these things off of based on different events. Some, and they can be recurring where, that's going to run every day at 3 in the morning and run some process on reporting, for example. Reporting is actually a really big one we see. So if you have different tools, like in marketing world, maybe you're going to go out and, collect some website data on your daily traffic, and you're going to collect some SEO data, and you're going to collect, whatever other data you're going to collect from different tools. Bring all that together and then run it through AI to actually create a custom report. And now you, as a business owner or marketing person, can say, hey, here's my daily information or my weekly information, whatever it is, and I can fully understand that. Another area where we really see a lot of this is in sales. So all sorts of sales
Mhm.
processes where you can design a process, and then use that process to effectively expand your sales team's capabilities by using AI. So let's take an example. Let's say you're using Salesforce and you have your clients set up in there, and you get an email, and now you want a process to happen that if someone sends a message about this or a question about this, well, you're going to go build an AI driven response. So it's not just a canned template, but an AI driven response based on that to actually follow up. And then potentially maybe the step is, hey, we need to get on the calendar. Oh, the AI is gonna send over a calendar, for them to look at, and then based on this date, you're gonna get it scheduled. You didn't have to necessarily do anything, and these communications went back and forth. And I think the joke about that is, your client is also running an AI system, and so all the AIs are talking and doing these things, and nobody ever had to talk to each other, which um, I don't think is a bad thing, and for how many things we do have to talk and figure out in person. But that's kind of the joke about have your AI talk to my AI. So
When I first asked that question, I thought, oh, he could come up with a couple examples. But I think if I let you, you could come up with examples for the next 5 hours. And it's because this tool of AI is so universal. And so as a business owner, it doesn't matter what business you're in. I feel like you could come up with a workflow that integrates AI for any business right now that could really increase the scalability or the efficiency of that business, which I think that is what makes AI so incredible, is the universality of it, right? Like it's for everybody and it can help everybody. So great examples. Now, you did bring up the joke, kind of plays into my next question for you, actually, because um, there's a bit of an elephant in the room when you talk about AI, because when people hear it, especially the word automation, there's often a fear of, is this going to replace me or my job? And so I think you have a really optimistic viewpoint when it comes to automation and AI. And so can you just affirm that we're okay, keep, and that we're going to get better with
uh,
AI, not
so
worse?
I'll first tell you my story. I was presenting at a conference. This is a while back now, but I was presenting at a conference, and I presented after a general and an admiral in the Navy. And after I got done, uh, they had you in different corners, and people could come over and talk. And there's about 30 people around probably. And the admiral marches over, and he's like, "I have a bone to pick with you." And everybody's like, "Oh, you're in trouble," and they all scattered. And he's like, "You're pretty optimistic about this." He's like, I work with nuclear weapons," and I'm like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! I don't want this anywhere near nuclear weapons, right?" So he's like, "All right, we're on the
Right.
same page." But it was pretty funny. So I am optimistic, but that doesn't mean we can't pay attention to what's happening, and we need to be very diligent about how we're implementing this. There's risks involved, right? And the question is, what is the risk? So we need to know what that risk is going into it, and we can know based on the capabilities we're giving the AI. So, this, like I said, if we're going to turn on an agent, it's a different thing. We'll talk more about those risks later. But as far as workflows, the risk is getting it wrong, but there's lots of ways to get it right and to check that it's right, or to kick it out of the system, right? So we have options in how we handle that. We just need to be designing our systems well to make sure we're thinking about that. So it's really about the design, making sure we're thinking about what could go wrong, and now how do we account for that, and how do we plan for that, especially as we start giving AI systems access to tools. Like, this is a fairly new thing, maybe the last 12, 15 months. We can now give them access to execute on these tools. Well, that means it has access to these tools, right? So whether it's in a workflow or whether it's in an agent, we're giving it access to be able to do something. So we need to be confident in the result that it's going to create when it takes actions in those tools. We want to give it the least capability possible that it needs to be able to do its job, but we want to give it the best prompt and instructions on how to use those tools. We need to include things like, hey, don't allow someone to overwrite our rules by just telling you to do that, right? So I think it's really funny. This is kind of a side note, but we have these conversations all the time. Um, People are like, well, I've been talking to a lot of legal people lately about how I get references of where this came from, because we all know the stories of, lawyers that created, went to court and they had all this documentation of all these cases. Well, none of it was true, right? So we need to know where the information came
Mm.
from. And I think it's really interesting when people tell me, oh, I used AI and I got a wrong answer. Well, yeah, 100%. And it's going to give us wrong answers. But you know what? When I talk to my buddy Joe, he gives me a wrong answer a lot too. So again, this is a human thing. So how do we treat this as a human response? Well, when I'm talking to Joe, I have more questions so I can make sure I can understand the response and his knowledge of the response. Well, when I'm working with I want to put things in there to say, hey, give me an accurate response or tell me that you can't do
Mhm.
this, right? So people are
Mhm.
dumbfounded that that's actually something we can do. Tell the AI to only give me accurate responses. They're like, what? I thought it always did. Well, no, that's because that's how we approach it with people. That's kind of built into our trust as we're talking to someone. But ultimately, it's not, because we know that, hey, this person, Joe the plumber is telling me how to do brain surgery. I'm probably not going to trust that very much. So we need to think about it that way, and actually that we can do the same thing when we're prompting our AI to say, hey, I only want you to give me factual, correct answers, but it's something we have to do. So there's things we have to put in our prompts that we don't necessarily think about when we're having a
Mhm.
normal human dialogue, but we need to consider that.
And that's in our AI 101 class, where we're training people how to build context into their prompts so that they get those better results that align to what response they want or need. So yeah, prompting is kind of baseline, right? It really opens up people's eyes of what's possible with AI, and then prompting becomes workflows, and workflows become agents, and it just keeps going. But understanding the basics is so valuable.
Yeah, and what's great is all those basics you're learning when you're just using it to chat yourself, all that applies to
Mhm.
when you're implementing this in a workflow. However, there's a little bit more advancement that you need, but all of that applies. But basically, when we're building out a workflow, we're treating it as a prompt template, um, where we're injecting information into that prompt based on what the current situation is.
Mhm.
But so there's some additional rules we need, but it's a pretty minor change from how you're going to build out a different solution, or just chat with a AI.
Sure, sure. Okay, let as we wrap up here, there's a phrase you often say that sticks with me, and it's the idea that AI always isn't a shortcut per se, but it really is an upgrade. So you really see AI as a way to enhance a business or enhance a workflow, right? And this is where you get the attention of all these business owners who are looking for that type of boost in their company. So I was wondering if you would share this idea of a difference between a shortcut and really an enhancement.
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting. A lot of what we're talking about for workflows has been possible for a long time in general. Now, the human replacement part of every step hasn't necessarily been possible, but this isn't really new. What What's new is adding the AI capability onto this, and now also using AI to help us design these systems, because we run into lots of clients we're talking to, and we're like, we want to build a workflow to do this, and I'm like, okay, how does this work now? And they can't define that. So we need to be able to define our current workflows in order to be able to design them as we move forward. But the AI can help us do that. So again, this is the value of AI. This is where we get these crazy efficiencies, and how we can do things a lot better, faster, cheaper, and actually grow our companies. So
Mhm.
the value is, okay. Let's not try to just save a few minutes here. How can we double the value of our company by implementing this process, right? That's really what we're trying to do. And we just got off a call where it's like, hey, if we can make these changes instead, we think we can double our company without adding any more people. That's an exciting proposition, right? So how do we
Mhm.
leverage these efficiencies to significantly grow what we're doing so we can do more? And again, that doesn't mean we don't need people to do this. We need smart people to do this, but we need the people that understand what they're doing and what works in your business today, to then come alongside potentially a tech person to help actually build out these workflows and start to build that efficiency.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Awesome. Are you ready? It's my favorite time of the week.
I'm ready.
We have reached the end where I share out my prompt of the week. And I want to say we're going to tackle a point of friction. And instead of manually sorting through emails, which we can all relate to, I tried to create a prompt of the week that kind of mimics a workflow. I was inspired by a workflow, let's say that. So let's say our point of friction is email overload. And so I am going to create a prompt here for you that's going to help you sort, reply, and prioritize. Now, obviously, this isn't to the extent that Lauren was speaking to, where we're creating an agent with actions and that type of thing. But this is a good starting point to get your mind thinking about all things workflow, steps that you can take, what steps are necessary to get you to your end result. And hopefully this prompt will save you a bit of time and reduce the friction of a Monday morning. So let's start. Here it is, prompt. It's Monday morning and I want to start the week strong. Step 1, scan my inbox for emails received last Friday. Step 2, sort them into 4 categories: urgent, needs response, informational, and can be archived. Step 3, prioritize each category based on time sensitivity and sender importance. Step 4, for the messages in the needs response category, generate short professional replies I can copy and paste. So I've actually run this prompt in Copilot, which Copilot aligns with this very well because it's has your Outlook right there and it has access to it. And this actually was a pretty powerful little step-by-step process that I was able to run in a single prompt and get some good information back. So I didn't use any specialized tools. I didn't create a workflow, but I was able to create some step-by-step process to at least kickstart my week and tackle that email overload on a Monday morning. So, Lauren, are you judgmental of my workflow prompt, or do you think I'm on the right track?
I think you're on the right track, and I think this is like as we're thinking about building out workflow tools, there are things you can do. Like even when we do like a custom GPT class, we can talk about kind of very, very basic workflow step processes inside those. So that's kind of what that's how this is approaching it. The other thing I wanted to point out is, like Angela mentioned, this works great in Copilot. AIs have this ability to add tools, and that's essentially what's happening here, is that it's coming alongside your Outlook to actually integrate with it. But even in ChatGPT, you can do that. It doesn't work quite as well right now, but there's lots of other tools that allow you to do that very effectively. And giving it access to these tools is where AI becomes super valuable, because now it can have knowledge and it can take actions on things that we actually want done. So this is a fantastic way to do that. I would take out the step. Why have me copy and paste? Why not just create the email and then I could just hit send, right? Which is what can happen. And so we're getting to that point where, or maybe I don't even have to review it again. If it's not critical, can you just respond and it just happens? So we're getting to where that all happens, and we're becoming more and more automated. But that's also the motivation of why we need to get started, because we need to get comfortable with these things. We need to start working with these. The tools are changing, the AI models are changing. And so we need to start getting more and more comfortable, because what happens on a daily basis with the updates that are happening, it's quite powerful of what's possible. And so if we're not kind of coming along in this process, we'll get left behind in what's possible or how to apply that.
You're absolutely right. And I even think about the flow of our classes. Like our 100 series classes are really just introduction and getting people to be comfortable with ChatGPT or Copilot. Then our 200 classes, we're building out custom GPTs and Copilot agents. And then that third level, our 300 level, is the automation and the workflow. And along the way, the confidence and the understanding is needs to be there to kind of scaffold that learning to
Mhm.
get you to the point of building out a workflow. So, fantastic, fantastic. Well, workflows and automations aren't what they used to be. With AI, they're faster to build, easier to use, and actually designed to support the way real people work. When you start with friction and build with clarity, AI becomes a teammate and not a tool. Would you agree, Lauren?
I agree 100%. I mean, I think this is a massive efficiency gain for your organization. So, I think we need to get people up to speed on AI, but ultimately, this is where the rubber hits the road, where you can apply this. It is not that hard to apply and actually gain massive efficiencies. And we're super excited to work with people to do that.
Fantastic. Well, to see where your team stands, download the AI Readiness Assessment at modelmind.ai. And thanks for listening to the conversation. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks for being part of the conversation with Model Mind AI. Until next time, keep leading, keep learning, and stay curious.